This is Civic from the San Francisco Public Press. Voting sounds simple enough. You just choose the candidates you like and vote in favor of the measures you approve. But it's not so easy, especially when you're picking among candidates who don't usually seek the political spotlight, like judges.
We don't tend to see very many of these judges on our ballots because unless they're being challenged by someone, it doesn't appear on the ballot. We tend to think of the legal system and justices as being kind of impartial referees. People should think a little bit more closely about what kind of freedom judges actually have. They interpret and apply the law. They don't make it up.
I'm Lila LaHood, and this is Civic. Before we start, I want to tell you a little bit about our nonpartisan voter guide that you can find if you go to sfpublicpress.org. We at the Public Press don't do endorsements. We do provide research summaries of all the ballot measures in both text and audio formats that break down what each measure is really about. We also have information about who supports and who opposes each measure. We include candidate bios for all the candidates running to represent San Francisco in local and state government positions. We sent each candidate a question about how they would address specific issues in San Francisco, and you can hear what they had to say. The responses from the 4 judges we're talking about in this episode are there as well. Just go to sfpublicpress.org to check out the March 2024 SF Election Guide. Now let's get back to our discussion about voting on judges in San Francisco. I spent time doing research for this episode, which is part of our Local Election Explainer series, and I'm still not quite sure why Californians are asked to vote for county superior court judges. But I've learned a lot along the way, and I'm here to share that with you. Most of our judges are appointed to the bench. The governor gets to choose an appointee when there's an open seat. Terms are typically 6 years, and those judges get to keep their seats unless someone decides to run against them in a local election. Most of the time, judges don't face challengers, and they don't appear on the ballot. But a pair of San Francisco judges are running to keep their seats in the upcoming March election. The last time sitting judges were challenged here was in the June 2018 primary election, and the challengers lost. We wanted to learn more about how the system works, so we reached out to Keally McBride, a professor of politics at the University of San Francisco, to talk about why this is happening and what is changing about the local political landscape.
Superior Court judges, they're appointed by the governor. And every 6 years, they are up for, reappointment or reelection. They can also be recalled. We don't tend to see very many of these judges on our ballots because unless they're being challenged by someone, it doesn't appear on the ballot. What's confusing is that we tend to think of the legal system and justices as being kind of impartial referees. And politics shouldn't be involved in the selection of judges, and politics shouldn't be guiding why judges make particular decisions. And so in some ways, having any kind of judicial election goes against our notion of the judiciary as the third branch of government, which stands outside of the normal competitive democratic system of the rest of the 3 branches of government.
In the upcoming March 5th election, San Francisco voters are being asked to pick between incumbent Judge Michael Isaku Begert, who's being challenged by Chip Zecker, and incumbent Judge Patrick Thompson, who's being challenged by Jean Myung-Jin Roland. What can you tell us about these challenges?
I do know that they have been accused or labeled as being soft on crime, and that therefore it's a particular advocacy organization, Stop Crime SF, that has decided that they want to mount more systemic challenges to superior court judges as their 6-year terms expire. There are minimum qualifications in order to even put yourself forward to be a superior court judge. You need to have passed the bar. You need to have practiced for a particular number of years. So they're presenting themselves as more moderate judicial candidates as opposed to what they're painting as overly progressive and lenient judges that are currently holding those seats.
We've seen local political action committees, known as PACs, getting a lot of money from the tech sector to push their agendas, which often align with those of loosely affiliated nonprofits. These big funders back individual candidates when they can, and because Superior Court positions are managed by the state, local candidate donation limits don't apply. Here's a breakdown of the campaign financing for the judges' races as of January 24th, the most recent numbers we could get from the San Francisco Ethics Commission website. Incumbent Judge Thompson has raised over $81,000 in campaign contributions, with $20,000 from the California Judges Association. His challenger, Roland, has raised nearly $125,000, with $50,000 from venture capitalist Jeremy Liu. Incumbent Judge Beggart has raised nearly $242,000, mostly with donations from lawyers and judges, except for a $100,000 loan to himself. His challenger, Zecker, has raised more than any other judicial candidate, over $494,000, including $100,000 from Chris Larson, co-founder of Ripple, and 3 donations of $50,000 each from various venture capitalists. I asked McBride to talk about why the challengers and their supporters are critical of the incumbent judges.
Stop Crime SF, they are pointing to specific decisions that these judges have made, like, oh, this person who had this much fentanyl was let go, and therefore this proves that they are really not at all tough on crime and that they are part of our systemic problem in San Francisco. But when you look at the overall judicial record, my understanding is that there's nothing significantly different about these 2 Superior Court justices than other ones. Judges have a lot less discretion than most people would assume. There are sentencing guidelines. I would argue that the DA's office probably has more to do with who gets charged and who does not get charged than your average Superior Court judge sitting making these determinations. So to me, it's just quite shocking and surprising that the judges themselves are considered culpable for the outcomes. I would say people should think a little bit more closely about what kind of freedom judges actually have. They interpret and apply the law. They don't make it up.
I asked McBride that if we look at the system as a whole, what is happening that is affecting the way judges are making their decisions?
Over the last decade in California, we've had pretty robust discussions about our collective opinions about punishment, incarceration, systemic racism. And so California as a whole supported these kinds of judicial reforms. We voted on statewide ballot measures that led to a large number of people being decarcerated. And at that moment, people felt like, oh, this is justice being corrected. We can look at the statistics. We can see that we have disproportionate minority confinement. So what, as a community, we are going to endorse creating new principles, new sentencing guidelines, new parole guidelines, new bail guidelines. That means that we are not spending valuable public resources locking up people that we don't think should be locked up.
So how does this fit in with perhaps other trends we're seeing with different political groups, presenting candidates or maybe even slates of candidates for local public office?
The most interesting aspect of all this is that for a long time, local elections were a complete snooze in the United States, or at least for, the last 4 decades or so. And very few people take the time to even understand who's running to be the election commissioner or the auditor or your school board representative. And what's happened is that particular groups have recognized, oh, it's actually quite easy to find candidates who more closely reflect our particular values. It doesn't cost a lot of money to raise enough campaign money to run an effective campaign for these local offices because so few people, run, so few people pay close attention to who they're voting for. And sometimes you can take over an entire school board, for instance, with, a group of 350 really committed citizens who have an agenda and would like to implement it. It takes some patience, right? But it's kind of the next step beyond just showing up at the school board meeting and making demands or demanding changes in policies that are happening in the schools.
So, how do you reconcile what's happening at the state level and trends towards sentencing reform with what we're seeing more and more here in San Francisco, which seems to be a call for why aren't there more arrests for certain kinds of crimes?
I would say COVID, COVID, COVID. We had elected this progressive district attorney. We were going to be on the cutting edge of having an anti-racist criminal justice system. And then COVID happens, and what's happened in San Francisco is maybe a little bit more extreme, but it's happened in virtually every single downtown area in the United States as a whole. Suddenly, with all of the office worker traffic disappeared, all of the addict presence is much more heightened. People have gone downtown. I mean, this has happened in Portland too, and there's similar concerns about safety there. It's interesting to me that even progressive communities are not immune from this. It's a legitimate, I think, fear that what we experienced was a kind of complete social breakdown. And if you have the experience of standing there and watching someone bash in car windows and take stuff away and do it so casually, you start to think there is something really seriously wrong here. So I think it's part and parcel of the overall downtown breakdown. And Chesa Boudin was the first person to end up, falling under that axe. But people still don't feel like San Francisco is working the way it did 10 years ago. And so they're looking for more leverage to pull, hoping, maybe if we get rid of this person, that will also end up creating a seismic change in what I see playing out on Market Street.
What we're seeing in San Francisco, are these initiatives that are being locally organized, or is this part of a larger effort? And how does that differ from what we might be seeing in other places that may be either local or part of a broader strategy?
There's no doubt that there's been a coalition of people who have provided the tools and the rhetoric for people who, for instance, want to run for their local school boards. So there are national organizations that provide support, either logistical or monetary support, for particular groups who might want to make a move on local political structures like this. There's a national movement to move the entire judiciary way right. And we're starting to see it's been successful enough at the grassroots level and all the way through. And now, of course, the Supreme Court of the United States has also been captured. And this was a specific strategy that was articulated by the Republican Party decades ago. They've been very patient in putting it together. The polling in San Francisco shows that people who identify in lots of different political categories are quite frustrated with the situation, the perception that crime is out of control, the feeling of not feeling safe on the streets is something that definitely goes across political identifications. But in other ways, it actually does fall in line very closely with national Republican strategies to run on crime, to try and handpick people who are making decisions in the courts.
What are people doing who don't like this attempt to move the judiciary to the right, regardless of whether it's that effort is associated with a particular party?
Right. What I think is interesting is that, one, that justices are being blamed at all. To me, this shows already that the ground of politicization around the judiciary has, all of those seeds have already, borne fruit and grown up. So at this point, people are poised to really think about the judiciary, not as neutral, but as, are they on our side or their side? And so if you're opposed to the politicization of the judiciary, which I would argue every American citizen, regardless of your ideologies, should be, if you don't have any kind of neutral judiciary, then who do you count on to adjudicate differences and to actually uphold the law in the case of pending legislation or actions of people holding office or police officers? If I were interested in resisting this movement, then I would be really articulating the fact that there's nothing exceptional about these judges' records, that they're being singled out and weaponized, that you support having a non-politicized judiciary that actually makes decisions based upon existing statutes.
Does the law need to change? Should judges who have been appointed be allowed to be challenged through direct election?
I believe it's a good system. And let me explain why. A lot of my work is on the idea of the rule of law and practices around the rule of law. And the rule of law is a really odd concept because we think of the rule of law as the opposite of the rule of men or women. It's the idea that the law itself becomes the ultimate arbitrator of power and that those who hold power can't break the law. And arguably, this is a concept that is quite centrally and very visibly under attack in the United States right now. So in one way, you can say, oh, we live under the rule of law because someone holding office can actually be held accountable for their actions. On the other hand, how people perceive the rule of law itself doesn't mean very much except for the fact that people think that the law is impartial. And people think that the law is impartial mostly when it reflects their own worldview back to them. If you look at the public opinion about the Supreme Court, as soon as the Dobbs ruling came down and suddenly abortion was not a protected right in the United States anymore, a vast majority of people said, oh, I no longer believe that the Supreme Court is neutral. And so throughout the ages, law has to change and does change in accordance with public opinion. Even the idea of what makes cruel and unusual punishment, it's an evolving standard. And the law actually says that. We can't label what is cruel and unusual. We have to know at any given time and place in history whether the vast majority of people would think this was cruel and unusual. It's like the law itself has to mirror public opinion back to the public. And therefore, when it gets too out of whack, it actually protects the principle of the rule of law to allow people to remove justices that they think are no longer apolitical.
So you're saying that we need to have these systems in place, and yet there's a bit of turmoil at the moment, both locally and nationally.
Yes, a lot of turmoil.
So what happens next? Would you like to talk nationally or locally first?
I wish I had a crystal ball. Everyone is saying, Keally, what are we going to be looking at the end of this year? Everyone wants to know.
Oh, you
right?
mean November, right?
Oh, yeah. well, and all the pending court cases, et cetera. So I would say between the very, very visible attempt to navigate whether or not people who hold elected office are held to the same standard of upholding the law as everyone else or not, and the success, actually, of the right-wing attempt to place more and more operatives in the judiciary system from the local level all the way up to the national level, we are coming into conflict where more and more people no longer trust judges. And when you get to a place where people no longer trust judges, then there is no civil way to moderate disagreements. So I think this is actually really, really important. If I could imagine a scenario in which I would be so proud of the citizens of San Francisco, it would be that they keep these justices in place, and also then maybe what they do is they demand a fuller account of every sitting Superior Court justice's records, that they embrace organizations like yours to have a yearly review of what kinds of decisions are happening and whether or not have an independent analysis of whether Superior Court justices in San Francisco are fundamentally out of whack with Superior Court justices in other Bay Area cities, in other parts of California. So rather than these like somewhat misleading campaign taglines, he let this person go free, it would be a really robust and healthy outcome for us to, as a community, get more involved and think about whether the judicial outcomes really do match our idea of what the law should be.
What comes next locally here in San Francisco, with this discussion? And then are there any changes on the horizon statewide? Is there anything else that we should be aware of?
We went through the big moment of decarceration, and a lot of that was mandated. I don't see California as a whole going back and embracing more and more tough on crime policies. To me, what's interesting is that people seem to understand that some of the crime and some of the disorder that they're seeing on city streets is really a housing crisis. Mm-hmm. So I would say solving the housing crisis seems absolutely impossible at this point, but that would probably go further to changing San Franciscans' feelings about public safety, that the city belongs to them again. Mm-hmm. That will matter more than the outcome of these Superior Court elections, right? We could go through 4 million different DAs, but I would argue it's the housing piece that's going to need to be fixed in order for people to feel like they can embrace San Francisco again.
Data analysis is a big part of our work at Civic in the San Francisco Public Press, and we agree that doing an analysis of judicial decisions in San Francisco Superior Court would be a worthwhile investigation. The next time I talk to you, we'll go over the party county central committees and hear directly from 4 parties that are active here in San Francisco. I'm Lila LaHood, and you've been listening to Civic. Civic comes to you from KSFP-LP, 102.5 FM in San Francisco, a project of the San Francisco Public Press. Our theme music is by John Dillon. Additional music was supplied by the Blue Dot Sessions. Our team includes producer Liana Wilcox and KSFP Program Director Mel Baker. Our elections team also includes Sylvie Sturm, Madison Alvarado, Zhou Wu, Jessica Prado, and Richard Nee. The San Francisco Public Press is a nonprofit investigative newsroom. Find more elections coverage and all our reporting at sfpublicpress.org. Thanks for listening.
This is Mel Baker for the San Francisco Public Press. What do you think the general public needs to understand about the role of Superior Court judges in San Francisco and the scope of their powers?
My name is Michael Isaku Begert. I've had the privilege of serving San Francisco as a Superior Court judge since January of 2011. The courts are the most direct and personal branch of government. In my 13 years as a judge, I have interacted with thousands of San Franciscans. Whether it relates to a speeding ticket or jury duty or a divorce or an adoption, the public is more likely to interact directly with a judge than with a governor or a member of the legislature. For this reason, you expect and you deserve a judge who sees the humanity in everyone. My respect for people is shaped by my upbringing. My mother is a Japanese immigrant, and my father was a 20-year Air Force veteran. I grew up with my 4 siblings in a modest home. I attended public schools, and I paid my way through college by working in a hardware store and selling children's shoes. These experiences taught me to respect everyone. The courts are also a check on the power of government. Judges answer to the law, not political pressure. My family history shaped my view of the importance of judicial independence. I'm named after my grandfather Isaku. His parents died when he was just 7 years old, so he was raised by his uncle, a man named Seinosuke. Seinosuke attended medical school in America, where he learned about democracy and social justice. When he returned to Japan, he was an outspoken critic of the emperor and the policy of military aggression that was leading Japan down a terrible path. In the fall of 1910, he and a group of other dissidents were arrested. He He was convicted by a corrupt judge in a secret trial without a jury and quickly sentenced to death. In January of 1911, precisely 100 years before I became a judge, the man who raised my grandfather was executed by hanging. I will always remember that judges must follow the law and act as a limit on government power. I swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution, and with your help, I will continue to honor that pledge.
Hi, I'm Chip Zecker, and I'm running for Judge of the Superior Court, seat number 1 against Michael Begert. The public needs to understand what our judges are doing and a judge's impact on public safety on our streets. For example, judges have the power and discretion to release fentanyl drug sellers back onto the streets pending trial. Judges also have the power to release violent offenders and users of guns back onto our streets pending trial. Judges also have the discretion on what crimes a criminal defendant will be charged with, and a judge can reduce those charges. So it is important for the voters to look at the decisions of our judges and understand whether Michael Begert's decisions are good or bad for public safety on our streets. If you determine that his body of decisions is bad for public safety on our streets, then I ask that you vote for me, Chip Zecker, for Superior Court Judge on March 5. Thank you.
I'm Judge Patrick Thompson of the San Francisco Superior Court. I was appointed to this court by Governor Gavin Newsom in March 2022 after working as a lawyer handling civil matters and leading several significant nonprofits in San Francisco for the past 30 years. I've been asked, what do I think the general public needs to understand about the role of Superior Court judges in San Francisco and the scope of their powers? Since my appointment, I've taken my role as Superior Court judge seriously. That's why I've been running my courtroom by the book. I believe well-run courts are the best way that the criminal court where I sit can ensure public safety and uphold our obligations to the public. A bit of background on Superior Court. When one goes to jury duty, you go to the Superior Court. It's where we have trial courts for civil and criminal matters. We also have traffic court, small claims, housing, probate for wills, juvenile, family law for divorce and for child custody matters. Superior Court judges are expected to have broad legal experience because the judge can serve in any of those different departments for a year or more. Even within our courts, we can play varied and specialized parts. Overall, we have one thing in common, though. We do not make the law, we apply and interpret it. In criminal court, judges do not decide who's arrested, who's charged, or what crimes are considered serious offenses. Those are decided by lawmakers, district attorneys, and the police. I describe how I run my courtroom by the book because my role is to apply the law to the facts of a case and come out with the right decision. I'm supposed to be an impartial, independent referee considering arguments from both sides. I'm not an advocate for a position, ideology, or political agenda. That's why I follow the law, not politics. Judges should respect the law and everyone who appears before them. That's how judges serve their special role in helping keep us safer and make our community better.
My name is Jean Myungjin Roland. In general, a judge's role is to manage their courtroom and oversee the cases in court. Judges hold people accountable, including attorneys, witnesses, and agencies involved in the cases before them. They ensure that laws are followed and parties are afforded fair and equitable treatment. Judges must follow the law and be impartial. A judge will hear the arguments of the attorneys, and they also review and weigh evidence in cases before them. They interpret the law when making their decisions, and these decisions involve their discretion on how the law applies to the facts. Let's look at some examples of how discretion comes into criminal proceedings. At an arraignment, which is the first appearance on a case, if the defendant is in custody, the judge will hear the arguments, weigh the facts presented, and decide if the defendant should be detained in custody or released. At a preliminary hearing, which is the probable cause hearing, the judge decides what evidence is admitted or excluded based on their interpretation of the law, deciding which cases will move up to the felony trial stage. Also, at this stage, the judge can make a detention determination as to whether the defendant should remain in custody or be released. At a sentencing phase after trial, the judge, having heard all the evidence, will hear the attorney's arguments, weigh the evidence presented, and decide the appropriate consequence. These are just 3 examples of how judges can use their discretion within the boundaries of the law. Similar and different discretion is exercised in other areas of law, such as civil, dependency, and delinquency matters. As you can see, the role of a judge is not limited to just managing their courtroom, but their rulings and decisions have significant impact in our community, including public safety.